it's a very tough scene to imagine. 10 to 15 years of memories and life just vanishing. One of my cousins lost her husband in the last few days before the ceasefire.
From your assessment, how strong or weak is Hamas today?
And as long as the occupation exists, people will try to resist it. That just shows how much the Palestinian people, especially in Gaza, feel about the Syrian revolution. When my father went back, he told me there's nothing here.
The Gaza genocide has come to a pause with the hope that a ceasefire will remain in place. The details of the deal has allowed many to return to their homes, shattered by a deliberate attempt to destroy all of Gaza's infrastructure. The West remains accomplices, and its media have shamelessly misrepresented what has happened. Last year, we spoke to Amr Abdul Latif from Gaza, who told us about his life growing up under this brutal occupation. Today, we have him back on the show. Amr Abdul Latif was recently a resident of Gaza. He came to the UK to study his postgraduate studies at St. Andrews University and now works in the country. Amr, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome back to The Thinking Muslim.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Happy to be here.
Well, it's I don't know what emotion to show because we see joy on our screens, but also we see immense sadness. I know you're from the north of the country, and your family ended up residing in the south during this horrendous 15 months. Just, I don't know, give me your reflections on what you've witnessed in this past week, Amr.
First of all, I'm happy to be here, and I think the show is doing an immense job at bringing awareness and keeping the Palestinian issue alive at this very critical time. So, yeah, I appreciate that. I think the past week has been overwhelming. People are still questioning, is the ceasefire going to last or is it not going to last? And that's the main question people are thinking about. But also at the same time, they're thinking about how can we, get by our basic needs? How can we get our basic needs met? How can we provide for our children? And that's a very critical question for every Gazan at this moment.
Yeah.
Generally, on the political perspective, you see people being able to return. A lot of people gave up on the idea of returning to Gaza City and the northern districts. But we still saw people return in huge numbers from the south. My family is included in that as well. So generally, people are happy to be able to return to see what has happened. If you listen to interviews, especially live interviews of people on the journey back, you see how people have very, very different opinions. But mostly they speak of being able to see the rubble of their houses, put a tent on the rubble of my house and sit in that tent. That's what people say they want to do. It's better than living in the south where, no one basically, because you fled to an area you don't usually go to. So other people are thinking about how can we get the bodies of our relatives and friends out. And it's a very tough scene to imagine, especially with the amount of destruction that's been done. But at the same time, you see people celebrating the fact that they're able to return, as well as the fact that they managed to get Israel not to achieve its objectives. And that in itself is considered some sort of a plus, let's say. I don't like to use the word victory after all the massive destruction and all the sacrifices. I don't like to use that word, and I think on a personal level, I think it's it's difficult for a person to say that word without thinking about what it could mean to people on the ground that have lost tens of people in their family and in their friends. If you classify as a victory, that would definitely hurt them, I think. But we can expand on that point later on.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, people are generally happy about being able to see the remains of their houses, the people they've not seen for 15 months now. but there's huge pain about everything we've lost, and there's realization that this could actually hold, and what are we going to do with the amount of destruction?
So it's just, express to us that amount of destruction. Explain what your family witnessed when they returned back to their homes in Gaza City.
So my father went back fast, and my brother accompanied him, along with one of my sisters that was split from her husband on the way back. Her husband didn't go to the south.
Yeah.
So that split resulted in huge pain, obviously. But they went back immediately as the way was open, immediately. I advised them not to. I was kind of afraid the Israelis would break that, because it's such a humiliating sight for them to see everything they've been trying to achieve, that ethnic cleansing from the entirety of the Gaza City and the northern district. All of it just fall apart. So I thought they would bomb it, but thankfully they haven't so far.
Yeah.
So yeah, she's met her husband. She's seen him. She's happy to see him after 15 months. But for my father, for example, he's lost his house. We had an apartment building. I don't know how you describe that, but it's a house with several floors. My floor, for example, is on the second floor. My brother's on the ground floor. My father and my mother on the first floor. That's all flattened. There's nothing left. So you're talking about 10 to 15 years of work just vanishing in thin air. And 10 to 15 years of memories and life just vanishing. And I think that's a huge toll to have on a person, especially older people, to see the work of their lives just disappear. Yeah. So my father took that. It hurt my father. I think one of the things he said to me is, I don't want to go see it. He just doesn't want to go see the rubble. We're fortunate though. We're fortunate. So my family, we have other options. So my father is sitting in a flat with my mother right now. My sisters managed to go back to the remains of their houses, and thankfully they weren't completely destroyed. They were damaged, but they're salvageable. Like you can make them work with a little bit of maintenance. So we're much more fortunate than other people. But also coming to realization, like my uncle, for example, was killed by an Israeli airstrike in this war. My cousin, his son, was killed in the same strike as well. Not in the same strike, actually. When he was taking his body to the hospital, they bombed his van on the way. And they also killed 2 of my cousins from my aunt's side. And then they continued to kill people from the family. And obviously, we're not the only people. We're actually much more fortunate than others. But there's like 35 people from my father's side were killed in this war by Israeli airstrikes, artillery, and things like that. And 4 people from my mother's side. One of my cousins lost her husband in the last few days before the ceasefire. In a bombing that just targeted a group of people just chatting in front of a building. So it's a huge toll, but what makes it easier is as it's ongoing, people don't feel it that much. You feel the grief and pain as it strikes, but then you're thinking everyone's kind of on the same boat, so you don't feel it that much. But when everything calms down, that's when real grief starts hitting. And I think that's where we're getting to right now as Gazans generally. So I think we're looking at a very difficult time coming. Hopefully less difficult than the moment that went.
From the outside, you said at the in the answer to my first question that you find it difficult to use the word victory. But of course, you also said that Israel's plans were thwarted. I mean, Israel wanted to ethnically cleanse at least the north of Gaza. and it was forced into this humiliation, really. And it now is in a situation where it has to see large numbers of people return to rubble, to their homes, to their partially destroyed or fully destroyed homes. Why did you find it very difficult to call this a victory? Because, you know, outside, and this sounds very callous actually, but outside, we're all calling it a victory.
There's an emotional difference. I don't know how to say this in English, but there is a difference between a victory and your enemy failing to achieve their objectives.
Yeah.
You could define that as a victory and of itself. But if you want to say a victory out loud,
yes,
you're saying that as well to the people on the ground. If the people on the ground hear the word victory, some of them may be delighted. That's true. Some of them call it a victory themselves. I've seen people that have lost way more than I've lost, and they call it a victory and they're very proud of it. But at the same time, I can't bring myself to say a victory because I didn't live through it. I didn't pay the same sacrifice that the people on the ground have paid. I find it very difficult to use that terminology.
Yeah.
When I haven't sacrificed as much as them.
Yeah.
But I do realize that the Israelis haven't achieved their objectives. I realize that we've certainly gone back.
Yeah.
We've achieved, you know, people are finally seeing their prisoners come out. So I want to tell you a little story actually about this. One of my sisters calls this a huge victory. Yeah, she's very happy about it, even though she lost a lot. But she's a teacher, and during the genocide, she made a school kind of a school in tents to teach children and things like that. So she collected a group of teachers, and they made their own kind of project. So one of her students has her father in Israeli prisons, and he's there for 8 life sentences. 8 life sentences. In Israeli terms, I think they have a life sentence is 100 years, not 25 years, like in other places. So like he's in for 800 years. And he came out in the deal. In the first few, I think in the second deal,
Right.
he came out, but she was absolutely struck by it. And my sister mentioned the story to me.
Yes.
She said, imagine this little girl, she's like 14, 13, and she's thinking, for my father to come out and for me to see my father, why does my friend's father have to die? And for a 13-year-old to say that thing, it makes you wonder about the prices or the price or the toll that was enforced on the Palestinian people generally, but specifically the Gazans.
Yes.
Not only by the Israelis, but all their accomplices as well.
Give me your reaction to the following comment I'm going to make. I met with Muslims in the UK, and they would say something like, the people of Gaza have paid a price for preserving the land and for keeping sincere against this oppression. They're committing themselves to a rebut against, you know, the occupiers, and there's this overwhelming feeling that the people of Gaza has paid, you know, a high cost, that it's for a virtuous reason. I mean, tell me about how you respond to something like that.
I think that, to be honest, you may consider my statements a little bit controversial. Statements like that leave a lot to wish for in terms of empathy. Like, I think people need to realize that the Gazan people are just people in the end. We're people who have emotions, we have dreams, we have hopes. Like, we're not a people that is just committed to a single thing that want to achieve it in any way possible. Like, we are a people. We have a lot of people that think what you've said, all right? And that is true. But there's also a lot of people who don't. A lot of people who think nothing is worth the sacrifice of my children. Nothing, absolutely nothing is worth me losing my children. One of my sisters thinks that. So for someone from outside to say things like that, it may be appropriate in certain scenarios, but I think generally it's I think generally it's hurtful to hear things like that, especially when the sacrifices for freedom, the sacrifices for the freedom of Al-Aqsa, the freedom of Palestine, is not a thing that should only be put on Gazans or just on Palestinians. Imagine the following scenario. Imagine if the war had happened, and Israel was left alone. The Israeli entity was left alone to fight and fend for itself. It didn't have the Americans behind it. It didn't have the Germans behind it or the British intelligence behind it. Things would have been way different. But you have a world war against a besieged people. How do you expect them to come out, victorious in material terms? I think if you say things like that, you have to make sure that you have the responsibility and you're acting for your responsibility to be able to say statements like this. It's just something I feel, but I'm pretty sure people would feel differently about this. Yeah. There is a good portion of Gazan Palestinians who feel this and feel like they've achieved a huge victory. Like even people that have lost a lot. Like I know a person who's a doctor. He's lost his entire family, wife and kids, everything. He's 50-something years old. And he keeps talking about how this is something in the core of Islam, that we have to be patient, we have to be persevere in these circumstances. We have to do it. And when it ended, he proclaimed that this was a victory, even though he lost everything. So I know people that have said that and feel that. But for someone who's not taking up the responsibility that he has or they have, I don't know if it's appropriate.
I sense from your voice and your tone, you feel a sense of betrayal. Is that a right word to use?
Generally, when you think about betrayal, you think about who do you expect to come to your aid generally, So if you're talking about that, you'd expect people, if we look at Gaza specifically, you'd expect people with resources, people with identity that are similar to you in identity, or people that are close to you in geography. And I think that's also like an Islamic kind of thing. Yet when you look at it, about what happened in Gaza, you saw Lebanon stand up, you saw Yemen stand up and do something. They try to do something, and they've paid a heavy price for it, both countries. But what have you seen from the majority of the people that share the same identity, geography, and resources? You've seen, in terms of armies, obviously no army moved a little bit. You don't expect armies to move. You expect countries to at least do something, It doesn't have to be armies moving for the defense of Palestine, even though that's something you would wish for. But you'd expect countries to be able to let in food and water. Why did our people have to starve and go into absolute famine? So that sense of betrayal is expansive. And it's not just me that's feeling it. It's the majority of, it's all of the Gazan people generally. Betrayal from other Palestinians, for example, in other parts of historic Palestine. In the West Bank, you've had people doing some things in some parts of the West Bank. But the majority of the West Bank was just, observing. Obviously, the PA has a huge part to play in this for repressing people and everything. But still, you'd expect the people to be able to do something. Same thing for the Palestinians in the occupied territories in 48. They've done absolutely nothing. Even the protests, they had 2 protests the entirety of the war that I know of. Maybe they've done more, but they haven't done much of anything. Even political plays, none of them were played. The representing parties for Palestinians or Arabs in the Israeli occupation government, they have representatives. They've done absolutely nothing too. So that's only on the Palestinian side. But you've had Jordanians protest. That hasn't achieved much of anything, but they did protest. The Egyptians a little bit, but you haven't seen much of any. You haven't seen a coordinated effort in either in Palestine, Jordan, or Egypt, or any of the close by countries. Even Turkey, like, has played a negative role in this. None of them did anything to stop what was happening through their countries. The Jordanian land bridge that was sending supplies to Israel, like, that existed. Yet, have we heard of any group of Jordanians trying to stop or protest that specifically? I do remember seeing calls to protest the land bridge on the street that were really heavily repressed. But at the same time, I haven't seen. I think the people of Gaza deserved for what they've sacrificed a lot more than what was given, definitely.
I mean, do you feel that, in a sense, Egyptians, they're with you, Jordanians are with you. I mean, everyone is with the Palestinian people and are against this. But of course, the oppression of the regimes are such that to voice that, even that opinion in Egypt, can be extremely dangerous. I mean, do you have some empathy for the very fact that these oppressive regimes are repressing those voices that are pro-Palestinian?
Absolutely. Like, I do believe that the repressive regimes are playing a huge part in trying to stop the people from doing much of anything.
Yeah.
I believe that. But that doesn't. Repressive regimes can stop popular actions, like people protesting and things like that. They can dispel protests, but people can do way more than just that. So we've seen, for example, in the what's it called? The Journalists Society in Egypt, protesting a few times, and the things they've said, the protests they've done, absolutely beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just thinking the malls in Dubai are full. The Instagrammers across the Muslim world are still Instagramming their banquets and their food. Now, I don't know. I mean, I see this, and then I see people starving, or in Gaza, and I get it. I get that these regimes are oppressive, but surely there is some personal responsibility.
I believe that as well. So that's what I'm trying to say. But you don't have to look far. Like the malls in Ramallah are full as well. So you don't have to look too far.
Can I ask you about the circumstances surrounding the ceasefire? I mean, it's very clear now that probably Trump lent on Netanyahu and forced this ceasefire through. Is that how you read it? And is that how the people of Gaza read it?
So, yeah, basically, it's very obvious, right?
Yeah.
It's obvious that Trump wanted this to stop for whatever reason he wanted it to stop, but he did. And that just maybe raises the question, was Biden really doing much of anything to stop it? Or were we really hearing true stories about how mad he is at Netanyahu and how tough he's being?
Yeah.
I think this has become very clear that the Biden administration just didn't want to do anything. They supported this and wanted it to happen through and through. But when Trump came in, he just wanted change.
Yes.
So that's what we're seeing. But we're not we're not foolish, right? The people in Gaza are not generally foolish. We know that Trump is mainly the reason, not mainly, but partly the reason why everything has happened, because he pushed the Abraham Accords in the first place.
Yeah.
And the Abraham Accords slowly started encroaching on Palestinian rights and the realization of Palestinian goals, which was, at least in declared terms, what the Arab states wanted. But we've seen that slowly, bit by bit, the Arab states are taking different stances and ignoring or bypassing the Palestinian cause to normalize relations and create better opportunities, economic opportunities basically for themselves, which you can understand. To create economic opportunities for your country is a good thing, but you don't have to do it on Palestinian blood, obviously. So Trump was pushing this so hard that it resulted in everything we're seeing, everything we've seen, and everything we're seeing still. And we're not stupid to also say that Biden was a little bit better, because when Biden came in, he didn't reverse any of it. When Trump moved the embassy to Jerusalem, a huge thing for Palestinians. I mean, a huge point of pain for Palestinians.
Yeah.
Biden didn't move it back. He could have done at least the Democratic Party's declared goals when it came to Palestine.
Yes.
Yet he did none of it. So that's what people see. People realize these things. And people don't really differentiate much in terms of... I see a lot of people that don't differentiate much between American administrations. People just see all of them are basically the same. All of them, to us, are basically the same. They want to fight us basically because we're standing in the way of their projects.
Yeah.
So they want us either quiet or gone. So people realize that.
Trump has announced that he wants Jordan and Egypt to take more people from Gaza. He talked about cleaning up Gaza. I mean, do you believe there will be a take-up from the people to move to these countries?
I think you'll need to understand several things to understand what's happening or what could happen. Mm-hmm. We've seen massive amounts of destruction.
Yes.
When my father went back, he told me there's nothing here, and he can't see any semblance of anything. He said, I couldn't even recognize the main streets. I saw a video from the right opposite our house, right? A video of the entire landscape in all directions. There's absolutely nothing. So if I go to my house's area, I wouldn't even recognize my house. Imagine that.
Yeah.
So there is that much destruction. There is so much infrastructure damage that there is no water at all from in Gaza City and the northern district. So that much destruction is there. Palestinian people do not want to leave their land generally. But people also generally want opportunities, want to feed their children, want to fend for themselves. And I think that was partly the Israeli entity's goal in inflicting mass destruction to force people to just find ways to leave. But even in that, they failed to even convince other countries or anything to provide a way for people to leave. You had Egypt saying you have to pay $5,000 per head to leave Gaza. And it didn't even work out for people that wanted to leave, for them to leave. So if an opportunity arises, I think there is a portion of the Gazan people that would want to take it, a portion that would want to take it. Because of how much destruction there is and how little to no hope there is in terms of rebuilding, in terms of political avenues, in terms of a solution being implemented.
Yes.
We don't see any of that. We just see kind of, if we're lucky, a turn back to the status quo. And a turn back to the status quo is the least thing anyone wants. We just want Palestinian freedom, Palestinian opportunities, people to have their rights again.
Yeah.
And that hasn't been realized. So some people, if the opportunity actually arises, some people might take it, but I think the majority of people wouldn't anyway. Yeah. Because we're just stubborn like that. I think the majority of people wouldn't. Some people disagree with me. So I've had this discussion with a few friends. Some people say, yeah, a lot of people would leave. I think a minority of people would leave. Yeah.
I mean, you would imagine that some maybe younger people will leave and their families remain in Gaza. I'm just trying to work out whether the intended aim of the Trump administration, of the Israelis, is in effect to clear out, as they say, Gaza by opening these avenues for people, for an exodus. there is a conversation that has been perennial. I mean, it comes up often in the Western press about the future administration of Gaza. And this is where we get it to the resistance and Hamas and its role. Of course, they've said they won't tolerate Hamas coming back into power. I mean, from your assessment, how strong or weak is Hamas today?
I mean, you can just look in the photos you see in the media, and the photos coming out from Gaza. Obviously, the resistance still exists in all the different parties of resistance still exist, Hamas included. So in terms of power, they've obviously been weakened a lot, but they still exist, and they will always exist because their existence is reliant upon the occupation's existence, because they want to free Palestinians. And as long as the occupation exists, people will try to resist it in whatever means possible to them. And no one talks about the root cause like that. Everyone's just talking, oh, how is Hamas? Or how is the resistance going to deal with that or deal with this? But the resistance is a natural reaction to the occupation and how much damage we've been taking from the Israeli entity. The occupation entity is just continuously making lives of Palestinians harder. To this day, there are people being killed in Gaza, for example. Like today, I read the news of one fisherman fishing in the sea in Gaza, was killed by the Israeli forces patrolling near the sea. I mean, patrolling in ships on the sea. So this is a daily occurrence. So how do you expect people not to resist that? So even though they've been weakened a lot, they will always exist. So you'll have to come to an understanding of how do you want to deal with their existence, rather than how do you want to eradicate their existence, because they will always exist. There is no way around this. In terms of administration, though, a lot of people in Gaza the majority of people don't want a way back to the status quo. They want a way for lives to be rebuilt at this point. After everything we've seen, they just want their lives rebuilt in some way. And currently, you don't see the international community, including the Arab states and everything, providing much of an opportunity for that rebuilding, an actual opportunity. You see a lot of talk, but in terms of action, you don't see much of anything. So, to be honest, I'm not really that much optimistic when it comes to that.
How do you feel about the release of the hostages, the Israeli hostages, and just their state compared to a lot of what we see of the Palestinians coming out of detention?
I think it's open for everyone to see, right? It's disgraceful what's been happening to the Palestinian prisoners. It's one of the main reasons that you had parties come to existence. The resistance parties come to existence because the situation for prisoners is getting worse and worse by the years. And when Ben Gvir came in, he made it several times harder for them to just live their normal prison life. I think that situation is absolutely disgraceful. And when you see the Western countries and everyone seeing this, yet not speaking up about it or trying to do something about it, it's mind-blowing, especially when you see how we've been literally under a mass bombardment, yet you saw resistance fighters trying to, take care of the prisoners they had, give them food, even though it was so scarce, and let them out in a good health condition, and that you can hardly find a single Palestinian prisoner that comes out in a good health condition. You can't see it. So all the Palestinian hostages that are coming out, you saw kids and women. Majority of them you could see the bones through their skin. So how do you expect people not to want to stop it in any means possible to them? Yes. I think that's one of the main problems in the Palestinian cause. People trying to come up with ways to free prisoners, and so far the only way that has worked we've seen is this. There was a one time during the Oslo Accords that some prisoners came out, but they were only fighters, prisoners like that. But I mean, that's what we see, and it's a huge problem for the Palestinian society.
When we last spoke, there was a conversation between you and I about Syria. And of course, at that time, Syria was a different country to what it is now. And a lot of the backers of Syria, in particular Iran, were at the backers of the Assad regime, were also quite, at least in some shape or form, helping the resistance, right? We get conflicting views on social media about how much the new Syria, the liberated Syria, is appreciated by people of Gaza. Have you had a chance to have conversations with people back home and how they see the new government and the new Syria and the liberation?
Good question, actually. So the majority of people I know in Gaza, the majority of them, the vast majority of them, couldn't be happier about Assad's downfall. They couldn't be happier. One of my sisters, the one I mentioned that would say, nothing is worth sacrificing my children or whatever. Like I can't imagine losing one of my children for any cause whatsoever. She did mention by the end of the war in the group chat, she said, look, if everything that has happened because God was just preparing the way for the Syrians to achieve their freedom, then it's worth it. And that kind of struck me, especially coming from her. And that just shows how much the Palestinian people, especially in Gaza, feel about the Syrian revolution, because we feel it's very similar to what we've been through.
Yes.
That mass bombardment, mass killing, starvation, and also the besieged people in Idlib for so many years, people in tents for so many years. Like, we've seen all of those phases, and a lot of people in Gaza were following it event by event, day by day, and feel strongly about it. So when Assad fell, everyone was so happy, everyone was celebrating.
Yeah.
Obviously, there are a few people who didn't want this to happen, but even those people think about this, think about it from a strategic perspective as, look, this is detrimental to the Palestinian cause because Assad probably helped some 2 Palestinians 30 years ago. So they think about it from that perspective, but the vast majority just couldn't be more delighted about it.
Yeah.
But where we differ, and where we have many diverse opinions, is on the future administration or the current administration, and then hopefully future administrations to follow.
Yeah.
We don't see much of anything yet from that administration. Obviously, it's only been in power for a month and a half now.
Yes.
So you don't expect much there. But we don't know how it's going to go. You see people being skeptical about it, especially in how everything had happened, like how everything happened or came to happen in there. But generally, people are positive about it and want to see good things happen to Syrians because we just feel a lot of resemblance to them.
Do you think the ceasefire will last, Amr?
Well, everyone hopes it will. With everything we've been through in the past 15 months, no one wants this to come back. But people are really scared because we see a ceasefire agreement that is very fragile. It's not very clear. You see a lot of ways the Israelis are trying to break it, and they're actively breaking it every day in different ways, creative ways sometimes, but it's continually happening. So how long can it last? And also you have to keep in mind that generally there aren't that many cards to play for the Gazan people at this moment. So if Israel makes any decision, if the Israeli entity decides to break the agreement tomorrow, the only thing that could stop it is basically the prisoners in Gaza. By saying, we have some of your people left here, if you want them out. That's the general way I think that would be. But so people are very scared about this, and people are scared, especially because of phase 2, because you're going to open the Rafah border and you're supposed to be letting in, for example, 200,000 tents, 60,000 caravans for people to live in, like temporary places. But you haven't let in a single thing. You're only letting in some food supplies, and in some areas too. So, for example, in Gaza City, my father says he only has access to some drinking water, and that's it. So he went from the south to Gaza City, and he can't find anything to drink. I mean, he can only find a little bit of water to drink and nothing to eat. So that is absolutely not sustainable, but it's already breaking the ceasefire agreement. So if that continues, you're actually holding the Palestinians or the Gazans generally in an enclosed place with little to nothing being let in a place that is filled with, as gruesome as this sounds, but it's true, thousands of dead bodies under the rubble, right? And this is an area after all of that destruction that is, it's very possible that diseases will start coming up. You don't want that to happen, or you're going to have a massive number of deaths in the span of a few weeks. So people are really scared of these scenarios. People are really scared.
Yeah. I mean, is there any hope for reconstruction in the short to medium term?
When you think about reconstruction, generally people are split about this, right? You have people thinking, if we're to judge by how everything had happened from before October the 7th, we had multiple aggressions against Gaza from the Israeli entity. So, in every single time, you had people talking about construction, organizations coming up. Some countries make a lot of noise about it, but in the end, you find little to nothing being implemented on the ground. So people have almost always not seen a single thing in terms of efforts of reconstruction. You see some projects being built, that's true, but it's not related to reconstruction efforts for people that lost their houses. So that's if we judge by past experiences. But some people say with the scale of destruction this time, that it has spanned literally everything, with the possibility of disease, with the possibility of this mass problems arising, something has to happen, or there will be consequences to literally everyone in the region. So this is unsustainable. But you don't see the political will anywhere to implement any kind of real solution that accepts Palestinian resistance as a fact. It exists. It will not disappear. It will continue fighting until Palestinian freedom is achieved. So you either want to help or you find a solution. You have to find a solution for the Palestinian cause. There is no circumventing it. There is no bypassing it. So for me personally, I'm not that optimistic. I think something will happen in the middle of these two things where actual reconstruction is implemented or nothing is implemented. I think something in the middle may happen where you'll have reconstruction efforts, but in the exact way the Israelis want it to happen. So it will make it harder for resistance efforts to come from the newly constructed places. This kind of idea, and they've already implemented it once in Jenin in the past. So that kind of idea might be, might float around. Some countries might take it up and try to implement it. But any solution, any kind of temporary solution that ignores Palestinian resistance is just doomed to fail.
And do you think the resistance is stronger now? How is it perceived? How is it perceived by ordinary Gazans?
So people are very split, like always. There are people who celebrate the resistance every day and are very happy about seeing the Israelis being, not achieving their objectives, being humiliated and losing some of their objectives. So some people are very, very excited and happy about this and praise the resistance and everything. And you see it in the media. Like, you don't need to hear it from me. But also some people on the other side are like, look, we need a solution. And here's the point I want to make, right? we've seen the epitome of what the Palestinian resistance could achieve, right? Armed resistance, I mean, could achieve. We've seen fighting for more than 15 months, people coming up from under the rubble to fight. We've seen like crazy things. Yet in terms of results, we've only seen mass destruction and things like that. It definitely didn't collapse, and it definitely will not collapse. But will this bring us any closer to Palestinian freedom? Is Palestinian freedom even achievable through Palestinian actions in general? When we see a world war happening against small and tiny Gaza with more than the equivalent of 10 Hiroshima bombings, or more even, in the span of months, on a very, very, very tiny plot of land with nothing to it, you start asking questions like, can this even be achieved? So I think a lot of people are happy because they can claim that victory without sacrificing anything, without taking much of the responsibility on themselves. And obviously we see a lot of people that take up the responsibility and try to do good things. But we see a lot of people just not doing much of anything and expecting that, oh, those people will definitely do it. Those people will look at them. They're very stubborn. They're very strong. Their iman, their faith. And it's all good things. It exists. Patience and faith and everything is core values, are really core values in the Gazan mindset. And I expect also the entire Palestinian mindset. But at the same time, there's a huge responsibility for every person of humanity, let alone, Islamic values, to want to do something or everything in their means to bring this to an end. Especially when there's several world powers that are willing to take up the fight for 15 months or more, or as long as it takes, against a small group of people. You have to come to an understanding that people need to rise up and try to join in the resistance effort to stop Israel from its actions, to bring about Palestinian freedom. I don't know. It's very difficult to talk about this because generally people have the idea that the Gazan people are very stubborn and they're very strong and they're able to do things.
Yes.
And that's true. But there's limits to everything. And since we've seen the limit, what are we doing about it?
My last question to you really is about hope. Do you, as a Palestinian, as a Gazan, have hope in the future of Gaza as a viable place for your family to thrive and survive in the future?
I don't like the idea of splitting Gaza from the rest of Palestine when describing it. For example, on the question on the that you mentioned before, and sorry for turning back, the administration of Gaza.
Yes.
I think I, alongside them, like all of Palestinians, want something that represents Palestinians, right? So it's not one party doing one thing or one other party doing one thing. No, people need to be able to vote in the people they want. Proper democracy, do whatever they bring in people that represent them into power. Yes. And that spans the entirety of the Palestinian society. It's not Gaza only. It's not the West Bank only. It's not Jerusalem only. It's the Palestinian group of people, a Palestinian collective that needs something to represent it. And that new government or entity or whatever you want to call it could have some plans for Gaza specifically because of the situation that happened. But it can't be split from the rest of Palestine. And any sort of rhetoric to want to split it, I think is problematic. So generally that's something I think the majority of people feel is needed. On your point though, about hope, I do have hope. You can never lose hope if you're Muslim. Yes. You can't lose hope. I do have hope that what we've seen really good things happen at the same time as we've seen really bad things. We've seen people on the streets in many countries. We've seen initiatives, really proud and good initiatives around the world trying to do something, and that's very, very good to see. We've seen Israel being humiliated, like on the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court. So you've seen really good things happen. So you're hoping that the future might be or would be good for the Palestinian cause in general, based on the sacrifices that the Gazan people have made. So yes, I'm happy and optimistic that that would happen, and I cannot lose that optimism. But the situation right now, the contemporary situation is very difficult. It's almost unlivable. So I would want my family to be able to live, but obviously every person makes the decisions for themselves. I mean, one of my sisters would trade nothing for her to leave. Like you can't imagine how much she would be willing to sacrifice just to stay. But every person has to make the decision for themselves. But at the same time, you don't want this to turn into a mass exodus. Yes. Or you would risk losing a very important part of the Muslim Ummah generally. So people need to do their part right now and help in whatever way possible the Gazan people to be able to be steadfast and remain on their land, build their houses, build projects, and try to make a living. Otherwise, we would be looking at a much greater disaster.
Amr Abdul Latif, Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
Please remember to subscribe to our social media and YouTube channels, and head over to our website thinkingmuslim.com to sign up to my weekly newsletter. Jazakallah khair.